In today's lesson, we are going to be looking at slope-intercept form. You've already been able to find slopes given an equation, and we've briefly talked about finding y-intercepts as well. So we're going to go a little bit more in depth in that, and then we're going to use that slope and that intercept in order to graph the line without using a table. Let's first start talking about intercepts. So we should remember that an x-intercept is where the line crosses the x-axis. And here's an example of the x-intercept. Notice the point is a0, so and the number would be in the x spot. Our y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. Here's an example of a y-intercept. This point's going to be 0 and then the number. And then we also have our slope-intercept form, which should be familiar for you. M, remember, stands for slope, and B stands for y-intercept. And we're going to use this y-intercept a little bit more to help us graph today. So let's get started with an example. And in the first one, or in these three examples, I want you to find the slope and the y-intercept of it. The first thing that you want to make sure to do, make sure it is in the form y equals mx plus b. If it's not solved for y, or in y equals mx plus b form, also called slope-intercept form, then you cannot give me the slope and the y-intercept. Remember way back in chapter 1, we solved for y, and I said later on when we go and graph these linear equations, it'll make graphing a whole lot easier if we know how to solve for y. Well, now we're finally using that a few chapters later, and we're going to have to reference back on how to solve for y in a few of our examples. So let's first do number 1. So number 1, we are in the y equals mx plus b form. So we have here's our y, here's our mx plus b. So all we have to do is state what our m is. Remember, our m is the number in front of the x, so 2/3. I have a rise of 2, a run of 3, and my slope, or my b, is -4. I like to write it like a point, so 0, -4. So then I know I have to make my point first, and I know where that point is, and I don't accidentally put it on the x-axis. I know I have to put it on the y-axis, and then I'll use my slope. So what we're going to do, we're going to go over to this graph, and we're going to make this point 0, -4. So I don't go left or right, I go down 4 for that, and it's going to be right on the y-axis. See my point right over there. And then from that point, I have the slope 2/3. So I'm going to take that point of 0, -4, and I'm going to go rise 2, or up 2, and to the right 1, 2, 3. Since it's positive, you're going to go +2 and +3 and make another dot. And then you'll repeat that same thing and go +2 and +3 and make that other dot. I can keep going on and on and on and on forever in that direction, but I can also keep going on and on and on forever in the other direction. If I were to connect these points and have a ruler, the line's going to go over here as well. Notice how it's kind of, stepping, or if I were to walk up, it would be going uphill because it's a positive slope. So I do want to make a couple points going back this way as well. So if I go down 1, 2, and to the left 1, 2, 3, that would continue on with my line, and it still keeps that slope, because we should remember -2 over -3 is a +2/3. So I'm doing the same thing, going down 2 and to the left 3. I'm just doing thinking negatives instead of positives so that I can make a few more points on my line. And there's my line. Now we can't forget, this is asking us to go back and find the x-intercept, so make sure you read directions carefully to see if it is asking for that. So here's my x-axis, and here it crosses the x-axis at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the x-intercept, and there's not a special letter for the x-intercept, would be 6, 0. Let's go on to the next problem. So if we look at the next problem, we have 3x plus y equals 5. Well, is that in slope-intercept form where y is by itself? You should be saying no. We have a 3x on the same side as the y. Since there's no sign in front of that 3x, it's a positive 3x. So we need to ask ourselves, well, how do we move over a positive 3x? We need to subtract that 3x. I like to always write it with my x terms first, but you don't have to. You just need to make sure that you remember that the slope is always the number in front of the x, whether or not you write it first or it is written first. It's just the number in front of the x. My slope is that negative 3. Since that's a whole number, I know that I need to do my slope, I need to go rise over run. So how do I make a whole number into a fraction? I need to put it over 1. That way I need to, in this case, go down 3 and to the right 1. And then my slope, my y-intercept, is going to be 0, 5. So I'm going to go graph that. I'm actually going to put a little number 1 next to the last one, and then I'll go ahead and graph this one. I'm going to change colors. I'm going to go to my point first, so 0, 5, so that means I'm going to go up 5 and make my first point. And then I go to my slope here, down 3 and to the right 1. Notice this last one has a positive slope. It's going uphill. This one is a negative slope, so it should be going downhill. And I should have that visual in my head before I even attempt graphing the problem. So I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3 and to the right 1. And I'll go do that again. And then I have to remember I also have to go on the other side. So if I backtrack, I'm going to be going up 3 and to the left 1, so I can continue that. Up 1, 2, 3 and to the left 1. And that will help me continue my slope on the other half of the graph. I don't want it just on the right-hand side of your graph. Then I'm going to connect my points, draw arrows at the end, and in this case I'll write a little number 2 next to it so I know which one's which. And of course I can't forget to find that x-intercept. This one does not have a very nice x-intercept. It looks like it's almost to positive 2, but it's not quite there. If I think about what I'm moving here, I'm moving 3 and over 1. So if I only moved up 1, I would be moving over like a third of the way each time. So that part right there is in a 3 section, so I'd go over 1, and then it's a little more than halfway, so it's going to be 2/3. So those aren't the easiest way to find an x-intercept. I'll show you an alternate way in a later section to find that x-intercept. But it is good to have an idea of what it is. So even if you're off just a little bit, it's okay. Just use your best estimation with that. It definitely should look like it's a little bit more than a half, 1.5, and kind of think about how you are moving to help you maybe decide on that fraction of how much it is. All right, why don't you guys pause the video and see if you can do number 3 on your own. So in number 3, again, it is not in slope-intercept form. We need to solve for y. I have a positive 1/2 that is with the y, so I need to move over that positive 1/2. So I'm going to subtract it. So I get y equals negative 6x minus 1/2. My slope, again, is a whole number, this time negative 6, so I'm going to put it over 1. My y-intercept is 0. Don't forget that negative sign with that y-intercept. And then I'm going to go ahead and graph that. So I'm going to make my graph or my y-intercept at negative 1/2. So now this one can be a little bit tricky doing my slope. Hopefully you realize when you are trying your slope, I have to go down 6 and over 1. So I have to stay in that half mark each time. So I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and over 1. And that's going to give me where my new point is going to be. And I'll make that little mark. Since that is such a large, I mean it's not that big, but since it is fairly large, I'm going to just go back up to that y-intercept and I'm going to go in the other direction. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and over to the left this time, 1. I've connected my points here, and I need to find the x-intercept. Looking here, it almost looks like it crosses 0, 0, but we know it can't.
because it crosses the y-axis here at 0, -1/2. So it can't cross at 0, 0. It can't cross at 2 spots on the y-axis, or it won't be a line. So it's just barely into the negative.
Graphing and finding the x-intercept is not always the best or most accurate way to do this. So we are just going to estimate it, and this is true for any of your problems. You can just estimate what the x-intercept is. In the next video, I will show you a better way to find an exact answer for your x-intercept, but this does give us a good estimation. So again, it's just a little bit into the negatives on the x-axis, so it could be like negative 0.1 or somewhere about there. It's actually negative 1/12, but again, just an estimate is all that I'm looking for here. All right, the last one that we're going to do is a word problem. It says the cost y in dollars for making friendship bracelets is y equals 0.5x plus 2, where x is the number of bracelets. Interpret the slope and the y-intercept. So when we're graphing this, we need to think about this situation. What is going on? Well, I have this cost y in dollars, and I have x is the number of bracelets. When I go to graph this, do I need all 4 quadrants here? You should be saying no, I only need that positive quadrants because I'm only going to be making positive bracelets, and I'm hopefully going to be making positive dollars here. So we're only going to be dealing with that quadrant 1. And I'm going to label the x and the y-axis. So here I'm going to label this number of bracelets. And then I'm going to label the y-axis dollars. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's identify the slope and the y-intercept. So my slope m is 0.5, and my y-intercept is 0.2. So let's make sense of this. I'm actually going to jump to letter B so I understand what's going on in this situation before I go and graph this. So my slope is 0.5. So what is that 0.5 talking about? Well, I'm making bracelets, and it's probably going to cost me a certain number of, or certain amount for every single bracelet that I make, whether it's beads or clips or, whatever, fasteners, whatever I need to have on that bracelet. It's going to cost me a little bit of money to make each of the bracelets. So that 0.5 is actually 50 cents per bracelet. Okay, when we are talking about slope, we will always use the word per. So something to keep in mind. Hopefully you've recognized that from our previous talk about interpreting slope, but it's always going to be per. It's a rate, change in y over change in x. Now my y-intercept is 0.2. Well, 0 is my x value, and remember back here we said x stands for the number of bracelets. So if I make 0 bracelets, then, well, what's our y talking about? Y is talking about dollars. It's going to cost me $2 to make them. Well, why would it cost me $2? Well, maybe there's some different equipment that I need to buy in order to be able to make these bracelets. So I'd have that initial startup fee of $2 no matter how many bracelets that I make. And then after that, there's extra charges for, like I said, the string or the beads or whatever the case may be. Okay, so now that we have a little bit better understanding of what's going on in the situation, we can go over and graph it. You can always graph it first, but I like thinking about what's going on in the situation. I don't need to change my scale at all on here because I don't have, too big of numbers here. I'm going to make my y-intercept, so 0.2, and then I'm going to go a half. So I can think of this 2 ways. I could think of this as 50 cents per 1 bracelet, or I could change it to a fraction and know that it's going to cost me $1 for every 2 bracelets. Whatever is easier for you to graph over here. So if I do 50 cents, I'd have to go up halfway and then over 1, and then up halfway, over 1. So I'd have a lot of little points going on there. So for example, it'd be like right there. If I wanted to think of it as up 1 and over 2, that would hit that second point that I would have hit if I would have kept going. So if you did the decimal, you'll have a lot of little points. And if you did the fraction, you'll just have your points spaced out, but it'll look the same.
In your summary, don't forget to explain everything that you learned in the video on how to graph slope using slope-intercept form. Also state anything that you are confused about. Be sure in the question that you state the slope and the y-intercept, graph it, and identify the x-intercept.